In-roof solar panels, on-roof solar panels. You might be thinking, what goes into all of these different methods of installation? What are the components? And is there a difference between the cost? Well, today you're going to be joining me on a couple of different sites where I'm going to be breaking down the difference between in-roof, on-roof, and I'm also going to be breaking down the cost at the same time. Let's go. In-roof solar panels. Now, most installers simply do not want you to see their job halfway through. It's not practical for them and it doesn't look particularly good. Well, I really do want to show you this job halfway through because I want you to know, as an end consumer, all the things that goes into this as a technology. Most commonly, in-roof solar systems are picked by those people who are looking to have a re-roof on their house, like this particular client here. Or you may well be having an extension on your property and doing some building work. And it makes sense to do an in-roof solar system because of the economies of scale involved. Wherever you've got an in-roof solar panel, you don't have the cost of tiles, and you also don't have the cost of the labour to install that particular section of tiles either. Instead, you can replace it with solar panels that generate electricity and look brilliant as well. Now, later on in this video, I'm going to be breaking down a little bit more associated with the cost of in-roof solar panels and maybe some of the downsides to in-roof solar as well. So let's start by breaking down some of the components of an in-roof solar system. Imagine you've completely stripped off the roof in its entirety. And this is the condition that a roofer would leave it in for us before they come back. So imagine this point, we've stripped off the roof, they've felt and battened it as standard. At that point in time, we come in and we install these trays that sit behind. Now, just something to note, different manufacturers of in-roof trays will install things slightly differently. So you may well have watched other videos associated with this and seen things like counter battens, so battens that sit on top of these battens as well. That is a common thing with certain manufacturers that go in. Some of them don't have these trays at all and instead rely upon a hooking system that sits around the outside. But I'm just going to lay reference to these specific trays that we're fitting on this job today. Now, essentially, what they have is a series of them fixing points that sit on top here. We have to fit in very specific points so that essentially we don't get any leaks that are happening at the same time. There are 2 trays per panel, and essentially our panel will then hook and slide onto the top of these as well. Then what happens is we have these lateral flashings that sit alongside. Now, these act a little bit like a gutter system, and they sit over the top here, and they have a little clip that holds them back. And then we have little counter clips that then hold the actual solar panels physically in place. We then have a roll-out flashing, our tile comes under here, and essentially your roofer will then come and put a series of tiles over the top of this here, so water can flow here. Now, you might be thinking, what in case there's a leak that sits behind here? Well, that's where we've got this expanding foam strip that sits alongside, down the side here, and this expands into place that prevents any water or leakage from coming over it in any way, shape or form. One of the questions that comes up time and time again is, how does an in-roof solar panel install and how does that work in a project management sense? So if I just hone in on a new roof, you would start by building your scaffolding. Your roofer would then come in and typically strip the entire roof back. Now, some solar companies may well do this as well. They would come and felt and they would batten the roof as well. Your solar installer would then come and they then start fitting trays first, get your roofer back in, allow them to put and dress all the roof lovely. You can then come fit the solar panels on, test and inspect it, fit your inverter, and away you go. Let's face it, there's a lot to all of this stuff and you're thinking, I don't want to get any of it wrong. Well, this is where you just want to make sure with your solar installer that they have a project manager in-house like we do. So we have a dedicated project manager that basically liaises and speaks with builders, roofers, so that the right thing happens at the right time and so that essentially you end up with a perfect in-roof solar system. The good thing about an in-roof solar panel system is the fact that you can't really get a problem with birds, if I'm completely honest with you. Because of the nature of how close they are to the tile and the fact that they've got an expanding strip at the side and the solar panel that's sat on the top, there's simply nowhere for the birds to roost. So we don't need a bird guard, we don't need additional bird protection because it's so close. Another great benefit of in-roof solar system versus an on-roof solar system is the weight of the solar system. It's significantly lighter, creating less of a problem for any structural engineers if you're building an extension to your house. Wind uplift. Now obviously with an on-roof solar system, roofing hooks and roofing rails are tested to very high standards to be able to take this. But if you're in a particularly windy area, if you're in a country environment, if you're right at the top of the hill and it's very windy and the wind's whipping up the valley, then an in-roof solar system may well just be the better option over on-roof. Now the sun's come out, and this is a good time to talk about temperature coefficient with in-roof solar panels. It's a really common question at the point of survey. If I go for in-roof solar panels, does my generation when it gets hot go off a cliff? It's a real common misperception around in-roof solar panels. Instead, there's a steady decline when it gets really, really hot. And allow me to explain this to you. Now, with your standard test conditions, you get 100% worth of output. As you start creeping towards 75 degrees, you get about 80% worth of output. So if you think on the sunniest day in the UK, we may well have high 30s by way of temperature, but the temperature at panel point is likely to be quite significantly higher. So if you're on the hottest day in the UK, you might expect 10, maybe in the most extreme circumstances, a 20% performance drop within the panels on an in-roof. But day to day in the UK, is that really going to be a problem? To be honest with you, whilst it will have an effect, it's not going to be that significant that you're going to see it kind of over the course of the year if we work on a weighted average basis to a point of where it's going to have such a detrimental impact. Now let's talk briefly about the types of solar panel that would be suitable for an in-roof solar system. In one of my other videos, we'll include a link in the comments, I discussed the difference between bifacial panels, monofacial panels and white backsheet panels. So if you picture it now, there's a solar panel sat on top of this here. Now, if I have a bifacial panel, the light's got to go through and try and come back because there are cells on the back of the panel. The light simply can't make it through enough. There's a very small gap. So whenever you're picking an in-roof solar system, my strong suggestion would be to go for a single monofacial solar panel, which is essentially cells that are just on the front. It's going to perform better and your cost is going to be a little bit lower. Talking of cost, later on in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the cost of an in-roof versus on-roof solar system so that you can make a decision and so that you can ask your engineer all the right questions. We've gone through in-roof solar panels. The next kit to go through is on-roof solar panels. So this is where the solar panel sits above the tiles. So as you can see all around me here, all the tiles are all where they were originally. Essentially, what my colleagues have done, they've removed the individual tiles and ground a little piece out the bottom of each one of the tiles. If we just get a little close up, you can see there. Now, you might be thinking in the back of your mind, is it going to leak? It's a really common question that we get asked. Water's flowing down, and bear in mind we've now got a solar panel that's sat on top of this railing. So there's very little water going to be flowing down the back in the first place. And when it does, it's flowing down, but you can get a capillary action, which is where essentially the water flows down and goes back up again. But because these tiles are so overlapped one against each other, essentially even if you do have some capillary action, it simply can't make it up high enough to be able to get in to leak. So this is an approved method for the MCS essentially of installing these types of hooks on this particular system. So once we've installed the actual hooks themselves, we have the railing that sits on top of the roof there, and then we bolt the panels on top. Now, they're bolted on top, not by bolting through, but instead they have these clamps. Now, this is a universal clamp, so this essentially will go on top of the panel. So my panel sat here and it pushes it really tight against the railing system. So it's simply done through force and the panel sits on top. How do we make sure that this is safe from a cabling perspective? How do we let it into the roof? Do we hang the cables over the side? So we've seen with the in-roof system that all the cables sit nice and neatly behind. With an on-roof system, it's cabled a little bit differently. Now in this, we've got an attic space that sits behind here. If you're a converted loft space, the cables may well run a bit differently, but we're going to work on this scenario. We use these LED flashing in kits, and this is something you must make sure is always installed, and it's something you must ask your engineering team if they're coming and installing these systems for you. Why? If you simply put the cables and notch out a bit of the tiles underneath, it's a very poor method of installation. If any of the cables are sat on top of the tiles, then wind can essentially start flapping the cables Over time, the plasticizer on the cable breaks down. You can have an exposure of the internal wiring that sits behind it, and you can get arcing and burning, and we really don't want to see that. So what we want is any cables tied up out the way. This is something we would always make sure we do. But as it penetrates the roof, we use a proper lead flashing in kit. These little nipples are cut off, and essentially the cabling then goes through the rear, sat from behind. So this then links up here, again stopping that capillary action. The individual cables come through here. We drill a small little hole inside of the tile, and cables come up through the top, ready to wire the top of our array. I'm going to myth bust something now. The distance of solar panels around the outside edge of an array. This isn't designed for electricians, so I'm not going to go down into super duper regulations, but we've got a regulation that the MCS has come out with, which is MIS 3002. Now this is best practice guidance essentially for roofing teams and solar installers that are installing solar panels. And what this basically states is you need 400 millimeters from the base and from the sides and from the top, which in this scenario we've been able to meet perfectly. If you want to go lower, so if you essentially wanted to bring your solar panel right down to the bottom, you can. But if I wanted to go lower, I would essentially have to do a weight loading and wind loading calculation to make sure I've fitted the appropriate amount of hooks on the roof itself, and essentially so that these solar panels can't pull themselves off. But that's never such a problem with modern day hooks on a roof. These are tested against such extreme wind tolerances that a wind tolerance on this is very unlikely to be causing a problem. The bigger consideration you need to give instead is actually if it snows. If I bring a solar panel right the way to the bottom down here, if you think if it's sat 400 millimeters up behind, water and snow can run off the panel and go straight into the gutter. If I fit a solar panel right down to the bottom, right down here, then essentially snow and rain could overshoot the gutter and essentially making you look a bit like a snowman when you're at the bottom, which is not something that you really want. Now you might decide, well, I've got an extension roof that's sat below here. Wind tolerance is fine, I've done my calculations, and there may well not be a gutter there. Or you might not be too concerned about overshooting the gutter, and you might decide to extend the guttering out to disperse snow. You might decide there's these hooks that can sit underneath that can disperse snow. So there's a few things we can do to mitigate it, to be able to meet the requirements of MIS 3002 and get within that 400 millimeter distance. So to answer the question, can I go within 400 millimeters of the outside edge and still meet the requirements of the MCS scheme? The answer is yes, you can, but you must engineer it properly for the specific scenario that you're in. Bird guard. The two main types of bird protection, one of which is a mesh. So this essentially looks like glorified chicken wire that's been thoroughly tested, gives a nice barrier to the bottom and sides of the solar panels. It looks pretty neat and tidy as well. So the second type of protection is solar skirt. Now, this is essentially a hard finish. At the top, we have a chimney vent. You can't see that from the ground, but that enables air to be able to get in and out from underneath the actual solar panels itself. But the front and sides of it have an aesthetically pleasing finish that butts up, so it looks from the ground a little bit more like an in-roof rather than an on-roof system. I just want to note, because I'm a big animal lover, that bird guard doesn't look to harm or hurt any animals in any way, shape or form. It just simply stops them making underneath your solar panels their home. Let them make a home in a nearby tree instead, and not your solar panels. Temperature of solar panels. Now, with an on-roof system, because the air can essentially get all the way under here, even with the solar skirt with the chimney I mentioned before, because the air can get underneath, temperature itself isn't so much of a problem with an on-roof solar panel. They can get great ventilation. Your on-roof can perform marginally better. There's never really much in it when you truly look at it. So we've talked about wind coming underneath. We've talked about potential birds coming underneath, but the one thing I wanted to cap off with you is light coming underneath. Now, one of the upsides to having an on-roof system is the fact that you're able to get what's called a bifacial panel, which is essentially where light, because light can get underneath, you can have solar cells on the back of the solar panel. This light can essentially penetrate through the panel and make its way back through the back, which can potentially increase your ROI. What happens if your tiles get broken? They're very simple and very straightforward to swap out as we go. That's something that we do, and tiles do from time to time get broken whilst you're installing. This is just a factor of what we're doing. You're always putting processes in place to try and mitigate breakages, but sometimes tiles do get broken in the process of installing solar. We always keep some spares. If you pick a good installers will do as well, and we would always make sure that any roof is watertight. So there are three main types of roofing hook. Different roofing hooks will suit different roof types. This is something that your installer will be able to pick up to make sure that they're installing the right roofing hook. Big national businesses avoid slate roofs and flat roofs because there's often a little bit more complexity in installing them. Now, I heard this morning from the client directly at the other job that we were at that they were spoken to by a national firm that said, we don't install in roof and we don't install slate because you can't. That's simply rubbish. You can install in roof. The reason why nationals don't do it is because it's more complicated. There's project management, it takes time, and they want to stamp out that production line. And it works the same one with flat roofs and the same with slate. It's not that you can't do it. There's just a little bit more work and a little bit more effort required on an engineering side. My hands are blue, I'm absolutely freezing. I'm gonna head over to the office where I'm gonna break down all the costs and the likely things that you need to consider for you so you can ask the right questions to your engineer to make sure you get the system that's perfect for your home. Let's go. If you're enjoying the content so far today, don't forget to like and subscribe. So now let's break down the cost. And in this scenario, we're going to be pricing for a 10 panel system. Something that you need to be aware of when it comes to pricing solar systems is that every roof is slightly different. So don't take this as binary, but this will give you a really good indicative idea of what in-roof and on-roof solar panels will cost. So if we kind of draw a line under this, so what we know is scaffolding is going to be pretty much the same in both scenarios. It makes no difference. If we've got 10 panels, that's going to be the same because the panels are the same effectively, whether it's in roof or on roof. Our wiring in both scenarios pretty much the same. It's the same person that's going to be doing the wiring as well. Our inverter, we know that's a subjective one, but in both scenarios, that's also going to be pretty much the same as well. So at this point, we've not really noticed a great deal of difference. Now comes the differences. So on the in roof, this is where we've got our trays that we'd seen earlier on. And then on the on roof, this is where we have railing. So with trays with 10 panels, typically speaking, you're going to be somewhere in the region of about 2,600, maybe as much as 2,800 pounds. That's based upon two banks of 5, one over the other. As I mentioned earlier, if we go for any differences in designs, you can have more flashings, you could have more rollout flashing along the bottom, and you can have more time, but we'll work on that basis. 2,700, about 270 pounds a panel. With the railing, however, significantly cheaper. You probably save yourself over £1,000 in that respect, somewhere in the region of about 1,700 quid for the same system. Something to bear in mind is where this cost comes from. So the trays themselves normally take a little bit longer to install, not massively. The predominant uplifting cost is actually associated with the components itself. As we've seen earlier, the railing system is very simply those lovely black long rails, splices, hooks, and essentially time for someone to do it. And that all important weathering seal that we saw earlier on. Whereas with our trays, we've got the back sheets, we've got the lateral flashings, that flashings down the bottom. We've got those all important arc boxes that go over the connector as well. So that's where you've got the extra time and extra components involved in trays. But where you have a railing system, I would strongly be recommending having bird protection. With trays, you don't need that. With railing system, you do. Bird guard, there are a lot of companies out there charging a fortune. It's quite cheap, if I'm honest with you, to be able to install. It's quite fast to install as well. We really don't want pigeons underneath panels. It's a pain in the bum. So, railing kit wise, you're about 300 quid, about £30 a panel. I think that's a fair and reasonable price that enables the installers to make a small profit from the work that they do, and rightly so that they should, but equally that you're not getting ripped off. I know there's so many companies out there charging absolute fortunes for bird guard, and it's just not needed. Now, You might decide you want something like solar skirt here instead. That's where these costs can start becoming a little bit more comparable. So if I had solar skirt in this scenario, I'm going to act on the basis that I don't, but if I had solar skirt, that could be anything up to about 800 quid. It's about £80 a panel fully fitted because they're a rigid metal. The cost of actual buying the kit again costs more. It takes longer to install solar skirt than it does on bird guard, and it just pushes that cost up. Now, also to note is the fact that all these parts, including the scaffolding, you don't pay VAT on. Anything ancillary to a solar system, you don't, and that includes hot water diverters and EV chargers for those considering as well. So that takes us to a total on the in-roof system of about £9,695. On this on-roof system, we'd be about £8,995. Now, something to note with this, and again, I can't stress it enough, is the fact that there are a few things that can move with this. So the railing kit and the bird guard are all subjective. This is based upon a Marley roof. If you have a slate roof, fitting times increase and the component cost a little bit more as well. Rosemaries are very similar. We not just have to notch the tile out as we saw earlier, but we have to fit a cowl up and over the top. We have to fit another product called a hook stop underneath the actual roofing hook itself. And these fitting times take longer and cost more. So this is what you would expect on a Marley system with a standard inverter and standard battery. If you're on an in-roof system, this is what you would expect in exactly the same format. For an accurate cost, of course, speak with your engineer, but it's really good to have these as datums to work from so you have an idea of what you can anticipate paying for an in-roof or on-roof system. Would you save, and this is the question you got to ask yourself, more than £700, essentially not paying for tiles, maybe over 50% of your roof and the labour, when an average re-roofing cost on a semi-detached house is £7,000, you could well have a saving of another couple of grand on this. So whilst this may well be a bit more expensive at the outset, you might have another couple of grand saving here effectively. So when you look at in-roof versus on-roof, when you add the cost of a re-roof, and if you were going to do the re-roof anyway, don't let 20 minutes worth of finding the right installer who can install the right system put you off from having such as a brilliant in-roof system if you're re-roofing, because it could well work out that little bit cheaper. If you have any specific questions yourself that you would like to ask me or our team, feel free to drop a comment below. Insurance-backed warranties. If you get a roofing system, an in-roof system, and it leaks, or if you've got an on-roof system and they're not fitted the hooks properly, the one thing you need to make certain is that you have an insurance-backed warranty. Manufacturer warranties cover the parts so long as they've been fitted correctly, but they do not cover the cost of the scaffolding or the person to go up there to be able to replace these parts should they go faulty and should you have a leak. And if you have any problems with your installer, you can claim on that insurance policy to cover the costs of any works that need doing. So one of the key questions to ask your installer is, do you have an insurance-backed workmanship warranty? Thank you.